There we go.
It's got it down low. Yes, it is. I'd like to start the planning commission meeting Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. Yes, it is. I'd like to start the planning commission meeting Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. Okay, is that good now? Right. We're starting the regular meeting June 19th, 2024. July 17th, 2024. At City Hall. Roll call.
Next meeting.
Here.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, here.
Here.
Yeah.
Right, approval of minutes. Any discussion? I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the June 19, 2024 draft of the planning commission minutes. Second.
Okay, Ted makes the motion. Charlie seconds, all in favor of approving the minutes. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Al, did you aye? Okay. All right, so the minutes are approved. Moving on to the first item on the agenda. 3A old business art communication. Art commission update. Do you have anything?
Madam Chair, this is just an update. At the last meeting, Commissioner Wilmot had asked for a roster of the people that served on the City of Petoskey Art Commission. And the memo has the members that have been currently appointed by the city council. And then we also included their Petoskey Public Art Policy, which has been, this is the 2023 version, I think, that you had in your packet. I did send out a revision. Sarah from the clerk's office, city clerk, had sent me a revised amended version that was dated April of 2024. So I wanted to make sure you had their public art policy. So that was just an information report back based on Commissioner Wilmot's request.
What month was that revised?
Yeah, April of 2024.
The only thing I saw different was on page 6, the commission formation. They changed it from specific people to 4 citizens at large for a 2-year term. That's the only thing I saw that was different.
Right, it looked like they changed the makeup. It was kind of staff heavy before and now there's.
So it could still be staff heavy, but it's not required to be staff heavy. It's 4 citizens.
4 citizens.
Yeah. All right, any questions, comments? All right, moving on to old business agenda, item 3B, public hearing on a sign ordinance amendment regarding murals. So we'll start the public hearing portion. So I hereby open the public hearing on the sign ordinance amendment regarding murals. And I'll have Jenna usually introduce it.
This is in regards to the discussion that we had at the previous meeting about the changes in the sign ordinance. The proposed ordinance was reviewed at the last PC meeting, and there was a suggestion made that was included in the minutes that the word that the under the proposed language that the word context be changed to concept. Since this time, since the ordinance that was subject here to the public hearing, the chairperson and I have had a couple of conversations relative to the mural issue within the sign code. And the two of us have come to the conclusion that we should have the public hearing to see if there's any public comment relative to removing murals from the sign code and giving that the responsibility to the city's art commission. But the other point that I wanted to stress with the group is Cynthia and I had talked and have taken a look at a couple other ordinances. And we feel that if the sign ordinance is not going to have regulations pertaining to murals, that really anything regarding murals should be stricken from the sign ordinance. So we shouldn't have a definition of mural in the sign ordinance if the sign ordinance isn't going to regulate it, right? So, and that's what a couple other communities have done that Cynthia had researched, was in their sign codes, there is nothing regarding murals because those are assigned to the local respective public arts commission. So we wanted to have the public meeting to see if there was any concerns about removing murals from the sign code. If there are not, then we would like to come back with a revised ordinance at the next meeting that basically deletes any reference to murals throughout the sign ordinance. If
That would be for the sign ordinance, but
Yes.
tonight we can approve passing it on to the
correct.
public.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions or comments for the? Yeah. Charlie,
That's a viable alternative, no question. If we were to consider substituting language, it would seem to me, for clarity purposes, we simply substitute that murals are not allowed unless approved by the City Art Commission. And that would plug the hole that people were concerned about between now and the Art Commission regulations being completed.
if we remove the language from murals, then it is not allowed in the sign ordinance.
But it may still be, if it's not, the sign ordinance previously said they're not signs.
But
Okay.
he's going to bring language forward at the next meeting to remove the
But if it's
language.
removed from the sign ordinance, that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean, just because it's not in the sign ordinance, doesn't mean somebody couldn't paint a mural.
Well, there's no mechanism for them to do that at this point until the art commission sets the standards. Yeah.
Somebody paints the side of their building because they're gonna be making something. They could paint it as a building.
Send your mic.
Oh, yeah. Could you repeat that for the record?
What if somebody were gonna do maintenance on the side of their building and decided to paint it as a mural? That wouldn't be prohibited, that wouldn't be regulated. What Charlie's suggesting, then we have to have a definition for mural in the sign ordinance, and then a provision in the sign ordinance that says murals are prohibited. But couldn't the definition of a mural be something that's regulated by the Public Arts Commission? That's what the proposed ordinance had in it, that we talked about at the last meeting, was that the language would be, murals would be considered as public art, not construed as a permanent or temporary sign. The location, size, and concept of a mural would be reviewed and approved by the city's art commission based on public art guidelines prepared by the commission and adopted by the city council. So I think it's getting it, this is getting at the same thing. I think Charlie's
Making it a little.
is taking it a step further, saying they're just prohibited.
I don't think we want to address that in the sign ordinance at this point. Yeah,
As I read through carefully through the policy, the art packet that you said, both of them. They define public art as art on city-owned property. And when I was thinking about this, when we were talking about it last time, I was thinking, if you, the building on Mitchell Street, there used to be the Cook Electric Building when I was a kid. There's still Cook Electric signs there. A beautiful place for a mural. I have no problem with having a mural there. But we should have guidelines for it. I also look at the Normal Business College. That's, as you come down the highway, you see the Normal Business College. You know, that would be another great place for a mural. But right now, right, it would be a wall sign. Correct? If somebody would wanted to redo that wall, it'd be a wall sign. And it would be probably within those wall sign guidelines that we've talked about. So I think that we do need to understand what happens with private property if somebody wants to put a mural on. And when you see what people have done in other cities and stuff, they have done murals on private buildings. And so it's public art, and this is defined as city-owned property. I'm having a hard time, where does this fall?
What we talked about, Commissioner, was that if we get it out of the sign ordinance, which we should, because it is public art, that Cynthia, the chairman, and I would sit down with the Arts Commission and help them prepare a very simplistic set of guidelines for how they would manage a mural on private property. So they have to include that into their policy. Because, yeah, their policy right now is public art on public land. Murals would happen on private property, and they've got to have guidelines for that.
Yeah, except that it mentions public art possibilities alleyways. Well, that's not necessarily public property.
It would be,
It was on the backside of a building or. So that's not specifically public.
I think the intent is that the Arts Council will monitor. I don't want anything in the sign ordinance. If it's, because we're not regulating it.
Oh, I understand, yeah.
Ted,
So I'm trying to understand this. So are you suggesting, for instance, we have this sample ordinance here. Number 2 is add the following language. So now we're suggesting we not add that language. We just have nothing. I just, kind of think nothing is all, nothing. So when someone thinks about doing this, where would they look in the city to see what they can do? I mean, they might think to look at the sign ordinance. I don't know what the harm is on saying something like what's in 2. I don't get it. I mean, if we can't define it, if that's the concern, then what goes to the art commission? Well, murals go, well, we can't define it.
If you take a look, I mean, Cynthia, she's done quite a bit of research on it. A lot of communities are moving murals out of the sign ordinance because of the content neutrality and because of the artistic
Right.
component of it. People have come to the conclusion that murals are not signs. Therefore, they don't want to regulate them in the sign ordinance and go through all of the various constructs that we have to follow now based on the Supreme Court ruling. So they're saying murals are part of the public art in a community. They're managed differently by a art commission to an application process.
But if they're on a private building, they fall under that category. It wouldn't be public art, so around the wall.
Yes, they are considered still public. I just went through this. city of Trenton actually has a mural art festival starting in September. They're painting 7 murals, having artists from all over the country paint 7 designated murals. All of those mural concepts never went through the zoning ordinance at all, the sign ordinance. They were all reviewed internally by city council, the downtown development authority, and their arts commission.
Well, I'm totally on board with it not going through, not being considered a sign, not going to. Regulated by the sign, we just wonder if we're covering all our bases, but. Not specifically prohibiting them as. A sign.
You're welcome.
Well,
So.
it, if the sign ordinance was to prohibit murals, then murals wouldn't be allowed, period. Whether they're
Could be referred.
commercial or
Couldn't be referred to.
Well, they would be prohibited unless they were approved, unless approved by the process of the.
okay. To prohibit something like a mural in the sign ordinance,
It would just be a definition. Murals are defined as not being signs.
Unless murals are defined somewhere in the ordinance, doesn't have to be the sign ordinance. If it's not defined somewhere in the ordinance, then anybody who's painting their house can paint a picture on it. There needs to be something in the ordinance somewhere that defines that it
Okay.
is a matter, that a mural, whether it's on private or public land, is the jurisdiction of the art commission. But until that's done, it shouldn't be withdrawn from, because there's no other definition for mural. It's a timing issue.
Okay, here's the straight, let me suggest this. Let's proceed with the ordinance as written, which says that murals are not considered a sign, but they have to go to the Arts Commission for approval.
Your butt. And then take it out later.
And take it out later.
Yeah.
After that's all, they have that all in place.
Yeah.
Then we go back and we remove it.
Yeah.
So we have a 2-step process.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I get that. That gets rid of that gap.
But presumably the art commission will have something that is regulatory in the ordinance that
Right.
refers to all of this stuff, right?
Because the other communities that have moved it out, they have a very small ordinance.
There you
It's
go.
been adopted by city council. It says murals are this, and they get regulated this way, and they get approved by the Arts Commission.
Dump it as soon as that's ready.
There you go.
So leave number 2.
Leave the ordinance as proposed, and then as commissioners and the 2 commissioners are pointing out, once the Art Commission creates their regs for how they're gonna manage murals, then we get rid of it in the sign altogether. Okay.
So there will be an ordinance for murals at some point.
Yes,
That's it.
It'd be an art commission ordinance.
not ours. It won't be anything.
But I'm just wondering where someone in the public would find that
It'll be in the city code. It'd be like,
in the code of ordinances.
yeah, it'd be like the short-term rental would be
Okay,
yeah, it's not a zoning.
not a zoning ordinance, it'd be a police power.
okay.
So they probably will have an ordinance that establishes them as an entity established. And then there'll be another document that then it spells out all the procedures.
And that's where the definitions will be.
The definitions and how what submittals they have to give to the Art Commission and maintenance provision, because some of the communities are requiring that once they're painted, they gotta be maintained and all that good stuff, which we don't, the current sign ordinance doesn't even get into that. So, but I like the I like the discussion relative to the kind of the transitory nature. Let's do the ordinance to move it, let them create it, and then we'll delete it altogether.
Okay.
You have to ask them. Okay.
I was just making sure that we're done. All right. So I will now open the floor for the public hearing. It is 6:19. To make a comment, if you're using a phone, press 9. If you're on the computer, click participants icon. Usually at the bottom of your screen. And if you do make a comment, please address the chair when speaking. State your full name and address before you begin. Please keep comments brief. If questions are raised, we will make note of them. If appropriate, we'll include them during the commission discussion. To hear your comments. All right. Would anybody like to comment? Anybody online? Okay. Having no public comment, I will now close the for the public hearing at 6:20 PM on July 17th, 2024. So now I bring it back to the planning commission for action.
So I just have a question. We have a sample ordinance in front of us. Number one is removing language from Article 6, permanent signs, Section 6.1 permitted signs. Basically removing murals from the current sign ordinance. But would that normally be part of our ordinance or would it be a separate action? I'm just wondering.
Building commissioners, we're taking the murals out of the permitted sign category, and we're putting it into the general provisions of the overall sign. So murals we're removing it as a permitted sign, and under the general provisions, we're saying how it's written, that it's not construed as a permanent or temporary sign. And
Okay.
it's gotta be reviewed.
Okay, so if we're gonna change, so the first thing will be that we'll remove the language from Article 6. Permanent signs permitted. Replace that with the language shown. Number 2, add the art language to Article 3, Section 3.1. Provisions applicable to all districts, so that's like the third chapter in the sign committee, and it's when something applies to all districts, so it's a general provision, so that will go there. We also have we do have a current definition, which is not content neutral. And current definition is a work of decorative art applied on or attached to an exterior wall within public view that does not include graphics or text that can be interpreted as containing commercial advertising or other content intended for commercial purposes. I found a definition, it was based on Cardozo Law Review, Art or Signage to Regulation of Outdoor Murals. And their definition is content neutral, and it reads, a hand-produced work of visual art which is tiled or painted by hand directly upon or affixed to an exterior wall of a building. So if we're going to keep the definition, I would recommend replacing it. Maybe it's moot, it's not going to be there that long.
Not gonna be there that long.
So maybe it's not necessary, just keep the non-content neutral one. Rich?
The arts commission should deal with that language.
Mhm.
So just a question on what you brought up. So clearly signs have to be content neutral. That was the ruling by the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
But we don't have any ruling that murals have to be content neutral.
Well, and the
Murals-
it has to be content neutral. They still would interpret that.
Well, I'm not sure of that, because we just said murals are not signs. And signs have to be content neutral.
Well, that'll be up to the Public Arts Commission too.
Right, right. That's what I'm saying. It's,
Well, I'm all for the definition to be content neutral. On the other hand, the Supreme Court ruling was with regard to temporary signs.
No, all signs.
All signs.
It's not just temporary. all
It's not a
signs.
retail sign that's content neutral. It's got to say the store is here.
yeah, but we don't regulate them, the content. We regulate them by the size and the
By
district.
the size of the district and the dimensions.
So they can have content on them, but we can't say,
We can't say, they could say peace, love and happiness. So
What the
that's
Supreme
use the
Court
name.
said is a retail sign,
right,
you can't have different, like Home Depot can't have a a sign that's larger than Lowe's. You know, you can't put in the ordinance that, oh, this type of retail, like a restaurant, can only have a 24 square foot sign, whereas a retail store can have a 36 square foot. The Supreme Court says that you can regulate signs by dimension and location and district, but you can't specifically say that a certain type of business or activity is what's going to be the determinant of what the size of the sign and location are. That's the content neutrality.
What you can regulate is time, manner, and place.
And the reason why temporary signs were part of the Supreme Court, this whole thing, was that the church said that their signs in Gilbert, the city of Gilbert, their signs were smaller than a temporary sign for like a real estate for sale sign. So they sued on the basis that they were being discriminated against because they were a religious organization. And their signs were smaller and they had to take them down sooner than other businesses that had temporary signs. So that's the content neutrality provision. It started with temporary signs, but then the Supreme Court said, if we're going to do it, it's going to be for everybody.
Okay. So are we ready to make a motion? Ted?
Yes, so I would make a motion to approve this ordinance to amend appendix C of the sign ordinance as presented. Which incidentally has the language to remove a section on murals from the sign ordinance and to add language about murals. It has a conflict and severability clause. And enactment and effective date is what's in the content.
Okay.
Well, and I would add something to that.
Okay.
This is not the appropriate moment to do it. I just want to make sure that if we approve it, we pass it along, it includes a recommendation or comment to council that this is our recommendation specifically until the art commission
We'll put that in.
formulates it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. So may I seconds?
Second.
Ted made the motion. Any other discussion? Roll call vote?
McSweeney,
Yes.
Meridian,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Robson,
Yes.
Wilmot,
Yes.
Buck.
Yes.
Okay. Is one completed. All right, moving on. All right, so the next item of business is 3B, old business, continued discussion on zoning districts. I didn't see that and focused on new business zoning ordinance update and forgot that there was homework. Did anybody else? It was, and also it wasn't in the packet to remind us that that was work we had to do. Did everybody else do the work?
I didn't do much,
Okay,
no.
you did the work?
I got it, but it's not easy work, but
I know,
you
so,
know, trying to think about it, but kind of loosely, it's, you know.
okay, so did anybody else do the work? Because if you didn't, or most of us didn't, then I suggest we postpone this till the next meeting, so we can all be on the same page.
I'm happy to postpone it because it seemed to me that I began doing the work, but then it raised more questions than it did answers. And I felt that maybe that clarification would come from the discussion tonight.
Okay. Do you want to do a quick overview?
Well, I'm just gonna, for review specifically, what I thought the work was our city planner consultant, Mr. Ike Rangeley, had sent us a memo after the last meeting, correct?
Mhm.
Comparing the R1, R2, and R3 zoning districts. A good comparison, single sheet with permitted and special condition uses, as well as dimensional differences between the districts, setbacks, lot size, width. So that was, I think, what we should, I thought, be thinking about was, are these more similar than not, or what makes sense here. And in addition, when I tried to pull up my zoning map, especially when you can see the lots and remembering my walk around, there's some sense that the constructs of our R1, R2, and 3 might not even necessarily fit the changes in town, specifically when you would see the old neighborhoods and then the mid-century neighborhoods. There wasn't that kind of distinction, so that was interesting.
And that's exactly what we're supposed to look at.
Charlie,
What struck me interesting about this particular assignment, there were several assignments, so that's when you said if we wanted to postpone. This one, I think is good for discussion tonight, because what it does is, as Chris pointed out. The criteria down before dimension for the 3 zoning districts is almost identical. There's really, it almost occurs to me that we could just have one residential zone in terms of all of these, the bed, what's allowed within those districts. It's very similar. There's hardly any difference, and the differences, I think, are minuscule. What's different is the dimensions. And I don't think it's inappropriate for us to ask what the impressions of the commissioners were on these differences in dimensions, and whether we need more time to go around and look at these different districts to kind of assess our opinion. But it seems to me like we're very close on these dimensions to a negotiated settlement.
But some people haven't really looked at it. I mean, maybe some comments, but they might want to think about it more. My comment on dimensions that I had was, what I thought was interesting is you kind of pull up the map, especially if you've got one of the map that has all the lots delineated, which this big one does. The lots are the lots. The lot sizes are kind of already there, and the city's basically built out. So it's kind of an interesting exercise. Again, I always get to, what am I thinking about here? A tear down. There isn't many open lots, so someone takes a home down and is going to do a new home. What are the rules? That's what seems to be most of what would happen, because it's already built. Potentially an addition, I suppose, could fall under the same thing. You'd have dimensional requirements or limits. And for me, again, realizing that R1, R2, or 3 didn't necessarily match the neighborhoods, always they changed on their own within these districts. We had talked about that concept of averaging on blocks. And to me, that just made a lot more sense than some of these arbitrary numbers. So I've got a built out town. I've got someone wants to do something different. Maybe take down a structure and put a new structure in. What should they do? And like it to kind of look like the neighborhood. How about that?
Well, part of what our exercise is to redefine the boundaries. If we're gonna keep R1, R2, and R3, some of those boundaries need to be relocated, because parts of R1 aren't really R1, they're more like R2. Things like that. So part of this exercise for me is to do that in context of, well, are we going to consolidate our districts along with that? Me, it's the texture of the neighborhoods, not so much the styles. It's the lot size, as you say, the setbacks are the biggest determinant. And so our kind of stand out as its own district, more so than R2 and 3 are. R2 and 3 are more alike, just because of the side yard setbacks and the size of the lots that R1s are typically on. And so it seems to me if we were to consolidate, we would maybe consolidate 2 and 3, but leave a separate R1. The other thing I think about too is there's a bunch of RM neighborhoods that really are single family neighborhoods largely. We want to leave them out of the mix, right, in terms of the discussion now. I mean, I think of the neighborhood west of the river. That has a lot of single family neighborhoods. Should it be RM zoning, or should it be an R2 or an R3 instead of RM? We really want to see single family neighborhoods or houses taken down for There's been no big push.
Right. I think one of the things, Commissioner, that we talked about at the last meeting was the exercise last month was everybody took their own walking tour of the neighborhoods. And hopefully I'm summarizing it correctly, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the impression was that when people were walking and they had their map, you know, in some streets across the street would be an R1 district, across the street would be R2 or R2 versus R3. And I think some of the comment was they look the same. So then the question was, well, what about the uses? Are the uses the same in the district, or is the district uses different? And that's why we have an R1, R2, and R3. And then this exercise was, let's look at the uses. And I think what Commissioner Paul was saying, that when he looked through the uses, they're pretty much identical.
Yeah.
So really it falls down to the idea of what are the, how do we want to address the dimensions? And, you know, one of the things we talked about last month was a lot of the rear yards are like 30 feet or 35 feet. The front yards, you can easily say, is the average of the block. And then it's coming up with some type of formula on how you manage the side yards. But then the question came, let's take a look at the uses in the district to make sure that we're we're missing something. And I think the analysis there is, there may be a little bit of differences maybe on special uses, but when we ran the analysis, most of the permitted uses were the same in all three districts. So I think.
I just wondered too, if you've got a really good point. And as I think about it, I just wondered in terms of, how to work through things. If we wouldn't deal with this, but keep an open mind as we could even move to business districts at some point and do the same thing, but for sure. But we could go to RM1 and 2, and in that discussion, some commissioners may say, hey, this doesn't make sense. Maybe that should be back to the residential districts, whatever we would do with them. So we leave that. Then it's not like, once we get to RM1 and 2, that's what it has to be forever.
Right.
We could change the definition of, we could put the two together. We could split out something that's in an RM1 or 2 when we get to that point, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I think the other thing that you talked about, Commissioner, was that we just had Lisa had an inquiry about a house in an RM1 district. That somebody wanted to buy and change it into more multi-units. And then when we took a look at the neighborhood is primarily all single family. So then the question is, do you want to have, you want to be able to include some additional, like, conversion of some maybe single family to duplexes. But in some of the areas that are zoned RM1, a lot of some of the neighborhoods are primarily all single family.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and you know, I agree with that analysis because we've encountered that, especially on the south side of town here.
I hate to, diminish the potential to gain more living units, but still. That is a big impact on those neighborhoods.
Yeah, and the issue here was the lot that she had talked to me about was that there was no way, I mean, when you add units, you have to add parking, right? And in this neighborhood, the lots were already small.
Yeah.
So there was no way that you could add off-street parking to accommodate the unit conversion. So the area was zoned to encourage multifamily, but the lot sizes won't allow multifamily because you can't fit everything. So that's kind of the analysis too that we need to go through.
And John, don't you, just process wise, even think as we go along, if we dealt with R1, R2, and R3, our primary residential districts, kind of thought we were kind of done with it, moved on to the RMs or the business districts. It's not impossible in the course of discussions, we'd come back to it.
Oh, yeah,
And
I think the most, like I've mentioned before, the most critical part of the rewrite is exactly what you're doing in terms of analyzing the districts, the dimensions, and where they need to go. That's the bulk of the analysis on the rewrite is the districts themselves. It's not the site plan review and the PUD and the zoning board of appeals. Those are standardized, and a lot of them are state statute. The real crux is what you're doing now in the discussion that you're having. And you can't do that in 2 or 3 meetings. That's gotta take some scenario planning and creating a few different maps and analyzing them and saying, nah, let's forget about that and let's move in this direction. So, but that was part of the analysis, was to take a look at the uses.
Yeah, the way the Ted said,
think we'll get back.
tackle the environment, there's no provide, all of the other ones, like the ways to those in the future.
Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it's
Charlie?
Yeah, I'm entirely in favor of sticking with just R1, R2, R3 for now. And then before finalizing it and sending it to council for finalization, then we see how RMs fit in terms of what we did with, so I agree with that. And I also, the point that Ted made is an important one. Frankly, I like the way things are in the city now. I don't think we're out to change anything that's existing.
Right.
In other words, we may decide at some point to grandfather everything that everybody's got right now and only address not only tear downs and new builds, or new builds on the few undeveloped lots that exist. But people might want to put an addition on or a porch on or something. So our regulations, our dimensions are going to have to help in those kinds of instances as well. But frankly, you know, we don't want to change whatever setbacks currently exist unless we do, unless we want to address the 35 rear setback or something more general. But kind of freeze everything the way that it is and only address changes that may take place in the future.
The city is pretty well built out, but I don't think we should discount the possibility of tear downs. Because
Oh, no,
that's happening in a lot of communities with pressure. And we have that pressure. People, it's already happening in a couple of our neighborhoods where people have combined lots and put bigger houses on it.
Conceptually, if you grandfather all of the existing setbacks, somebody wants to tear it down, whatever they put in its place can't do anything different than what's already there.
No, well, you want to address that?
Go ahead.
If you tear something down, then you can use the standards of whatever the current standards are. Those are the ones you're expected to use. So if we've changed the setback, that's the new setback that they could do.
Unless the new standards that we create say that the existing standards are grandfathered, and if
No.
you tear it down, you have to stay with the existing setbacks.
Well, that's that type of provision would be, you would set up a,
Well, we have grandfathering clause in there already.
you wouldn't want to, grandfathering causes nonconformities. Nonconformities cause variances. If you're trying to maintain the historic development pattern of a neighborhood, then you have an overlay district that says that if somebody tears down and rebuilds, it's got to be within the context of the neighborhood. And the reason why I say that is because it gets to what Rick just mentioned. If you have a standard zoning code that says you have to have a 25-foot setback, a 30-foot rear, and two 10-foot side yards, right? So 25, 2 10s, and a 30. Keep that in mind. And a 30% lot coverage. Keep that in mind. So I have a standard 50 by 120 lot. I buy the guy next door, and now I have 100 by 120-foot lot. And if I build within the dimensions of the district, I can do 25, 30, and 10, and my 30% lot coverage now increases. So I end up with a huge building in a neighborhood that has smaller houses.
Two in between side yard setbacks disappeared.
They disappear. So if you want to maintain what you're getting at, the context of the neighborhood, then you got to have a provision that says, I don't care if you buy combine 3 lots. What you build on the 3 lots has got to look like fits in proportionately with the rest of the neighborhood. See what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so John, that has gotten to my question about exploring the concept of and knowing what's allowable in terms of lot combining lots in residential neighborhoods to either encourage or prevent tear downs, you know, can you have provisions that you can't tear down two houses and combine a lot?
Yeah, they just explained.
It's with an overlay.
We could do it.
Okay.
You know, I mean, they refer to
Yeah.
them downstate. They refer to them as McMansions,
Mhm.
you
Right.
know, where they tear down two houses and then they build a large house in its place. But
And that for me was one of the things that really bothers me when I hear the whole context of the discussion about what we might want to have as goals for zoning. That kind of a situation creates less housing, there's less structures, it's way more expensive housing. And it has the possibility to not fit in with the neighborhood. So it just about achieves absolutely the opposite of everything we want to do.
yes.
Rich,
Well, I just wanted to point out, since you're speaking about that house on Hill Street,
Mhm.
was that 2 lots? I think, no, because that house is real out of step with the rest of it, that neighborhood.
Al?
Similarly, the house on Lockwood and Mitchell. That corner, they actually moved the house to make that
Same thing.
same thing, so that gets away from our whole process, that's others have said, of trying to have more housing available.
If we did infill, and we might want to encourage some small apartment like, you know, where a double lot would enable more housing.
Mhm.
Are there exceptions you can create? You know, where it's, I remember seeing in farm zoning that it was a fancy neighborhood. But one of the houses was actually an apartment building, but it looked like just all the other houses.
Yeah, I can bring it in for the next meeting. City manager and I, along with Amy Tweeden, had a meeting with at the chamber with Dan Leonard from MEDC. And Dan brought in an example pattern book that was developed by MEDC with the city of Grand Rapids. So they actually put together a series of building plans for various residential houses on lots that were kind of pre-approved by the city. So it's like, if you want to build a duplex in a residential single-family neighborhood, then you've got to use one of the 3 designs that are already compatible with the neighborhood. And it gets to what you're saying, that if you wanted to build a triplex and you had the off-street parking for it, they already had a building prototype that you had to use that was pre-approved by the city. So, and it gets into the texture of the neighborhood. So, I mean, that you don't put in the code, but you can have, the planning commission can have an approved pattern book that's already been pre-approved by the city and by the county building department. So it's like somebody wants to build, they'll pick one of these 6 prototypes and go ahead and build it.
So that would be a thing where you must pick one of you can't, it's not just a suggestion, it's like these are options, but you have to take one.
Yeah.
So Cynthia's comment was, if I'm understanding, was potentially there might be this overlay district in, you know, initially I had suggested, would we not allow combining lots? But then the suggestion, if I understand it, is, well, you might allow it, but maybe it would be worded so you didn't decrease the number of housing units. So it would, if you combine 2 lots, it would require you to have at least 2 units.
Yes.
And potentially you could do more up to whatever limits.
And we do have, I have a map. I think at one point we need to use one of these TV screens for mapping, to put stuff up on as part of our discussion.
Right.
But we did do a map that shows all vacant residential property in the city, and there's more than what you think.
There is more.
Yeah. So I can send that out to you so you can take a look at it.
That would be
And
great.
what you need to do, you're gonna get it in PDF form.
Right.
And you need to zoom in on it. The more you zoom in, the more lots you see. Okay, so
Okay.
I'll send that to you and you can take a look at where these vacant parcels are that are classified as vacant residential by the assessor. And you can see them scattered throughout the city and get an idea of what neighborhoods they're
And John, what you're describing, as part of this MEDC pattern book is basically a residential form-based code.
in. Correct.
And, we've adopted that for some of our commercial standards, so potentially we could look at something like that residentially as well.
I will send that out to you this week. Not, I'll just get it out for information so you can see what MEDC was doing with the city of Grand Rapids. So,
So John, what you're talking about, like I'm aware of one over near me, maybe it's on Clinton Street. I got it right, but a situation where a house, a lot, it's kind of a narrow, long lot, and then they own the lot behind them and they effectively use that as their big backyard. So it's a vacant lot, that would be considered a vacant lot,
Mhm.
but it's often the same adjacent homeowner, but obviously at some point they could decide they wanted to sell it and
absolutely.
develop it, yeah.
Yeah. So give it some more thought, okay? And
The rest of us do the work to begin with.
yes. Cynthia? I have to give you a D for not doing your homework.
I deserve it. Charlie.
Yeah, just three quick examples that I just wanna use. We bought and redid our house in 2012, 2013, and part of what we did, even though the house was built in 59, we ripped down the garage to put on a new garage. And in so doing, we made the garage footprint larger. And we were allowed to do that because the previous setback was like 20 feet or something like that. And now the R2 district, I think we're R2, the R2 district allows a 5-foot setback on the side. That changed the character. We're the beneficiaries of it, but the neighbors, the next door neighbor was concerned because that changed the character of the neighborhood. Do we really want to do that? Or is that a cautionary thing that we want to if we want to keep the existing character, do we want to allow people to expand their footprint if they do a tear down or add an addition? You don't want to prohibit somebody from the Florida room they always
I
wanted.
think it's part of the process we've talked about. Once we get kind of like a general framework of where the planning commission wants to go with.
Right.
Like on the residential districts, okay. We'll do the business ones different later. Then I think it would be appropriate to have a kind of like a community open house. And invite people in the community to come in and take a look at what some of the proposed ideas are. To get some feedback so no one's surprised. And to see what the residents think about some of these ideas on, neighborhood context and things along those lines.
Understood. The only other point I want to make, and then I'll shut up, is that I love the alleys of Petoskey. I love driving around the alleys. It's kind of crazy, but I love doing it. And I love the old carriage houses that are there that are beginning to show signs of age and wear. And while it may not be economic for them to tear those down and build new and have housing up above it like it used to be because of the Emmett County building codes, it may not be economically feasible, but it's also not allowed under our current code because they can't meet the setbacks.
Correct.
And that, I think, is not right.
That's correct. And that's what an overlay would do. That says that
It grandfathers the footprint, essentially, is what it does.
yeah, I mean, a lot of, Rick knows this, a lot of historic neighborhoods. The carriage houses were built almost on the rear property line and
Exactly,
now they're all non-conforming.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we get there, I hope that we can preserve that history that we have in the Petoskey.
Well, the bottom line is. The zoning code here and the zoning code in a lot of communities is not very favorable to historic
Right.
properties. They're just not. I mean, we. Petoskey adopted a code, its first zoning code probably in the sixties. And, you know, a lot of the neighborhoods were built in the 1890s and 1910s. The ordinance doesn't match the historical development pattern, which always causes everybody a little bit of angst. Because like you're saying, you know, the carriage house is built 2 feet from the property line, but the ordinance says it's gotta be 30 feet away. So.
Well, that's a good point too, Charlie, because I always get a little anxious when I really low setbacks with people living. I'm thinking living next to someone's backyard. But of course, the alley situation is entirely different. You're not bothering anyone
Right.
if you're right on the alley.
Preserving the character of this beautiful town is in part being very careful to protect the history, which includes the existing structures.
Correct. Consistent with the master plan goals.
Mhm.
Madam,
Yes, Doug.
I just wanna, I think part of this process is for everyone to kind of share their views and as a board commission, we start to see where there's common interest. And so I'm in agreement of a lot of what I heard tonight. So I just want to make sure I kind of highlight some things that I heard that so people know where what I'm in favor of, or things that I'd be more interested in hearing more about. We've talked several times about the average setbacks with our neighborhoods, and I felt like just listening to some of my other fellow commissioners that there's some consensus there. Like Commissioner Paul, I do have concern with tear downs in our community, and I really want to make sure one of our goals is to encourage additional number of units, and so to keep that in mind. Along that, I'm not quite sure how this fits into some of our other goals, but encouraging home ownership, affordability, year-round residents. One of the things I notice as I look at some of the neighborhoods that I'm more familiar with, there just seems to be in certain areas, higher number of seasonal residents, and sometimes I feel like some of these neighborhoods they're not very active. And things that we can do to encourage home ownership and full-time residents is something that I would certainly be interested in exploring. The other thing I just want to throw out there too is I know we talked about as we look at some of these transitional neighborhoods is kind of how I think of them, and maybe after we looked at the residential neighborhoods, then come back to see how they transition to some of these more dense neighborhoods. I think it's important that we do that, and maybe do that early on in the process. There's areas in particular around the Greenway corridor and the ZIP building where it just seems like we're allowing for higher density, higher stories in this particular part of the town. And I wonder just transitionally how that looks with the number of single family homes. And so that's just one example of where I do want us to be thinking about these areas as they line up with other higher density zoning areas.
Any other comments?
Good discussion.
Yep. All right, moving on. To new business number 4A, zoning ordinance update, planning commission packet number 1.
I sent out in part of the packet, this is information only for the overall planning commission, was to get, I submitted articles 1, which is title and purpose. Article 8, site plan review, 9 is special land use. 11 is zoning board of appeals, 12 is administration, and 13 is amendments. I prepared those because they're mostly procedural. And I wanted to get those into the zoning committee to start going through the more the text review in order to come back with a more substantive draft. But I wanted to make sure all of the PC had copies of the articles, and if they want those members that are not on the zoning committee, if they want to submit markups or comments, I would recommend they send them to Lisa. that way she compiles them for me and for the planning commission, so. I know Albert had already done a review on Article 1. I have that and Lisa has it and we'll provide that to the zoning committee on some of his comments, but. The zoning committee was formed back in April of 23. And that includes Cynthia, Commissioner Paul, Commissioner Detmer, and Commissioner Newman, with Commissioner Wilmot as the alternate. So this was packet number 1, information only. I'd like to bounce these into the zoning committee. And then eventually they'll cycle back to the full board for review and discussion.
I just had a question, as I read through this lengthy document and with some knowledge of what our existing language is, I thought it would be useful, especially, so this is from you, a working draft, proposed draft, a starting basis of this.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, and I picked up maybe a few, and we'll get into that in the committee, but there may be some things you purposely added, changed, or deleted. And it would be helpful if is there a brief way where you would say in this section, I want to point out a few things.
I can do that for you.
That would be helpful,
Yeah.
just so we focus on a little bit what you were thinking.
Yep.
And then, because I got some of it, but I'm feeling like I'm not sure.
I can do that on every article. I can give you a kind of like a brief memo on what the key bullet points are.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll do that for the committee. And I'll make sure that the entire PC gets a copy of that as well.
Yeah.
Charlie,
Yeah, I followed this through Article 1. Because I took the existing ordinance and it kind of sort of looked, your new draft kind of sort of looked, there was some similar language. And where I stumbled, and by the way, everything I read the whole thing, sparse period, anything that we currently have, okay, so yeah, absolutely. Does it need changing? Probably some, but sparse period. So then I go to Article 8, which is the second one on the list. And I open up the ordinance thinking that it's going to resemble Article 8 in the existing ordinance. Everything from that point on is completely new. Question that I had is, our ordinance, it may be completely dysfunctional, but it does currently highlight some of the same things that you've reorganized in this new draft.
Mhm.
So where I had a problem was, how do I compare the new draft to the old?
I'll give you a memo, but it's gonna be, I had a discussion with Cynthia about it. If my counterpart Lisa was here, she would, support me on this. There are so many provisions that are scattered throughout the current code that if it was a more recent zoning code that you wanted to go through and kind of update and
Mhm.
change and revise, we could do the highlighting, the tracking method. But in the current code, there's so many provisions that are scattered all over. It's gonna be very confusing to do that. So what I'll do is Commissioner Paul sent me an email asking me about this, and I agree. On each of the articles, I will give you like an introductory memo that says, these are things that are in the current ordinance that are here, but here.
Give us a reference point in the current ordinance so that we can go see that language and then come back to this.
I can on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, but like I said, it's, I had cautioned Commissioner Moss, he said he wanted to do this comparison. I said,
You can't, right?
well, I said, I'd love to have you do it, but I said, you gotta understand this is gonna be an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Based on how the current
Yeah.
ordinance is laid out.
Yeah, I know it's a huge battle, and for me, it was a way of also familiarizing myself with the unknown, because I'm so new. What I want to make sure is that essential things that have been in our zoning for a good reason are not accidentally left out. So that's why I did that.
Right.
And one of the things that came out to me is, although we had the statement about the city master plan. When you start looking at the process under the Article 8 information, in the old process, it said a developer is encouraged to meet with, or maybe must meet, I don't remember, it's different language in different spots. With the planning and both how their plan sits with the master plan. And nowhere in that I saw in Article 8, I mean, I haven't finished, as I said, I started doing Article 8 and I started with the zoning board. With basically a side-by-side comparison, that I sent John and Cynthia. And well, there's a thing called search.
Yeah.
And you search for, on a PDF or in a Word document, you search for a phrase and you could find it, and then I just referred to it. So, you know, I'm happy to do that. The big point is I do think we need to look at where we've changed part of an ordinance, that we don't drop something very important. And I'm trying to figure out what's very important even right now, but that was the reason I did that work, and I will probably do it myself for my own purpose as I can. You know, I would have probably had another section done, but I had the wonderful thing of grandchildren showing up this weekend that weren't expected, so.
Lucky you,
Yeah, that was great.
Charlie.
One other request that I'd have, you really got my curiosity up about what the heck is Article 2 through 7? Because how is this whole thing gonna look? You've got obviously, you made that 8, 9, 10, and 13, and so on and so forth. You have a concept for what those other articles are gonna be, and I'm really curious to see where this is going. You can put TBA there, but I'd like to see the article number.
At the very beginning of this process, I gave you, you may have. You get so much information, I'll send it back to you. I had given you a draft table of contents.
Oh, had you? I
Yeah, and that's,
didn't remember.
and I'll send that to you. That's what I'm following.
Okay, that would be very helpful.
Okay, anything else?
I just wanted to comment, I did read through the whole 36 pages and it, on first glance, it seemed pretty reasonable. I mean, I was trying to remember and recall and look up some things, but what we have from my knowledge, what we should be doing in it. So I think it's a good starting.
Good. I was hoping we get into the committee and then get back. I'm sure there'll be some changes, but we wanted to get started. And these are the procedural stuff. Site plan review, special land.
Easy part, right?
This is the easy part. You guys are talking about the harder part is the districts. Uses.
You say it's easy, but there are procedural changes. I think they're great changes from the procedures that we currently have. But there may be objections from the citizenry to changing the current procedures at some point in time. So we'll get there when we get there.
All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna take any public comment.
Oh,
Maybe just on an issue right now. Or well, it's coming up pretty soon,
right.
just because we just did zoning.
Would anybody like to make public comment on what we just discussed, the zoning ordinance update? Okay. Oh, all right. Ann Shrigley would like to get it admitted.
Maybe she doesn't.
She wants to be admitted. She may not be speaking.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think we'll move on to the new business for B neighborhood enterprise zone map. Is that what this is? Well, we got this in the packet, Area Planning Commission coffee group.
Yeah, I think
That, this was in there wasn't anything on the agenda.
Yeah, under updates, under number 7.
Oh, that's updates, okay.
Yeah.
I'll put that to the back.
Incorporate.
okay.
So
That's under updates.
we're still on for the neighborhood enterprise zone. Yeah.
Okay. Moving the idea of the enterprise zone ahead. In 2023, we had a presentation to the planning commission housing quality. And part of that assessment indicated that there was a need for rehabilitation in parts of Ward 4 and some parts of the historic parts of Ward 3. Since that time, the city, through the manager's office, applied to MSHA and received a housing improvement local livability grant, which is called CHILL funds. And those funds are going to be directed in parts of the community to help people that are income qualified to rehab their homes. The NEZ in those areas would allow the people that are investing money in the grant funds to rehabilitate their houses. The NEZ allows those improvements not to be taxed over a period of years. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1. Folks are getting some assistance to rehab, but at the same time, they're not going to get penalized for having to pay increased taxes. So we're recommending, based on the analysis, that a significant portion of Ward 4 and Ward 3, which is primarily, you can see it on your map. It's south of Mitchell. It's east of 131 and north of Sheridan, that portion of Ward 3, which has a lot of the smaller historic neighborhoods, being incorporated into the NEZ. I wanted the Planning Commission to take a look at the map. The Planning Commission is not going to, the City Council has to put in place the NEZ, but I wanted the Planning Commission to weigh in on the map as part of the overall housing strategy for the community. So that's the purpose for this on the agenda. Was I wanted to show you the map, and I wanted to get your feedback on the map. The state legislation caps the amount of land in the city that we can have in a neighborhood enterprise zone, and I ran the numbers, and we're within that percentage with this geographic area. So
it's a percentage of the city that a maximum percent that can be included is what you're saying.
And it needs to be contiguous?
yeah, and the abatement that would be given is up to City Council. They can set up any guidelines that they want, but the abatement is up to 15 years. So they could do 5 or 10 or 15. Some communities have a kind of a matrix, some type of metrics that, depending on the amount of improvement, it slides the abatement further. That's something that the council can work out.
Well, the council will work it out with our recommendation.
Well, the administration will work out the
Recommendation.
recommendation to council. I wanted to.
So really, all we need to weigh in is on the map,
I wanted you to weigh in on the district, yeah.
It looks good.
because I had some questions about the NEZ and how it works, and this 2018 document didn't answer a lot of my questions. But if it's out of our lane, I don't need to ask them.
It's in the council's lane. The council's the one that's got to establish the NEZ, but I wanted the planning commission to weigh in on the district.
I generally agree with this district. It looks pretty good. If I'm looking at anything, I'm looking a little bit at Carlton and Myrtle and Wacazoo adjacent to Jefferson, that part down there.
Okay,
Like, could that be in? Should it be in?
we have a little bit of room on the percentage.
And then in Albert Moss can weigh in. I'm pretty familiar with the Morgan Creedy Curtis Park area, which is really very nice. And I almost wondered if it was, compared to this map, a little nicer than some of those areas. Although I will say maybe Lawrence and Curtis have some homes that would.
Lawrence and Curtis has been a lot of updating on those homes, which were older homes.
Yes.
The Preview neighborhood was built in the 1950s. My house was built in 1970. It was probably one of the last houses in that neighborhood. So if you wanted to put Carlton and Myrtle in, and maybe take out Hillcrest, Morgan and German, or Morgan Yeah, yeah, if Hillcrest, Phoebe and Jarman, and maybe even Morgan down to Jarman, those are all fairly new houses and stuff. Now, I'm not speaking for my neighbors, because they may want to rehab, and they may want some of that money.
Right.
So it'd be interesting to find out what they would think.
So run those streets by me again.
If Hillcrest, Freebie, Jarman, that little area, now, if you don't have to remove it to keep square, to keep within it, I would say keep them in, but I would agree with the Carlton Myrtle.
Potentially Morgan down to Jarman too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, you're trying to think not just, I mean, obviously, a lot of people would probably like to be in this zone, but there's limits and
Right, and so,
we're trying to weigh what needs it most.
right, I would agree, and I think Carlton, because we looked at housing for about 5 years before I retired, and they were, these were where I was coming, and we looked at our houses in the Carlton and rural streets, which were great places to rehab. So I would think for those.
If I can add. We can add Carlton and Myrtle in
Right,
without affecting the percentage.
yeah,
Should I keep in Hillcrest?
yeah, I would.
Okay,
Yeah,
just keep
I don't know what you think.
Yeah.
Right,
What about that walk, is that walk,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, could you just square that out?
yeah, square that off.
Take it, walk it all the way down to Atkins.
right,
So Waukezu would be the boundary?
well, I was in the east boundary.
Okay, all from Mitchell all the way down?
All the way down. What's the percentage you're dealing with?
It's. It's in the FAQs here, See, I think it's 10, I think it's 10% of the city area, and the benefit here is the 10% also includes Bay Harbor,
Which is expanding.
which is, yeah, so we. That's part of the city, so we can take that acreage and shift it into the city core.
Okay,
Would that boundary need to go all with the Waukezu boundary all the way to Mitchell? Or just from Pearl Street?
You guys tell me,
I think going from Michigan, because when we get down to Mitchell, we're really in the business zone.
Yeah.
So I would think that if you go Waukezu up to Atkins or College View, wherever the residential area is.
Pearl Street.
But,
Pearl.
yeah, from Pearl, yeah, all the way up Waukezu.
Adding,
Right, add
taking away.
those, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely add those.
Do you add that block that's not colored in between Michigan and Mitchell?
No, that's what I was asking.
That's a pretty much business. zone.
business,
That's pretty-
that, is it?
Yeah,
so.
yeah, that's where the library is, where the back lot is on Michigan in that area. Yeah, that's where the back lot and that stuff is.
Yeah.
Right.
across the street,
Same place as school, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're down State Street now.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
We're how far, where you want to cut it boundary off?
So you're saying from Michigan to state, take that out?
I don't, no, there's houses in
No,
there.
yeah, leave that in.
The Michigan.
Go from Michigan, go on Waukezu from Michigan to Athens.
Just,
Okay.
just add that last.
Michigan becomes the northern boundary,
Of the eastern line, yes.
eastern side.
Yeah, which it already is.
yeah,
But we're just adding 3 large blocks on the south side.
Yeah, take something out, take out the St. Francis, blocks, since those are largely.
I also had a question about on the north side, rather than stopping at 31, going up Countable to Jefferson and across Jefferson. No, not necessary.
Yeah, there's probably 8 or 10 houses, but they're all in good shape.
The ones overlooking the, up on the top of the bluff there.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, it's changed a lot in the last 20 years.
So is this income qualified? Okay, but if I remember, when city council,
It's not.
okay, so right, so you could, anybody could, anybody that's in those areas.
Criteria is that you've had owned the house since June of 1996.
Okay, okay.
This is for people that
Good,
have bought the property, that are in the neighborhood.
okay.
It's an incentive for them
Let's
to
do key. Okay.
Doesn't the value have to be 80, cash value of 80,000? Did I?
And or less. But this was written in 2018, the values have changed. Is there anybody in town that has a value of $80,000 or less?
But there's also a caveat that says, per unit. That's about 80,000 or. That's per unit, but that's.
The MEC legislation was updated 2 years ago.
Ah,
The fact sheet is from MEC. It's got the basics to it. The act was updated a couple of years ago. And the one benefit of updating the act was that communities under 20,000 do not have to have a first, have to have a home inspection. Communities over 20,000 in order to get the NEZ, you'd have to have a home inspection, which means you have to update things in the home that have been, are not code compliant. So it's actually a benefit for smaller communities. So.
Was it-
that added-
Wasn't the code compliance, if they were going to sell,
So,
which actually, on the one hand, seems like an incentive to get things updated. Up to code. I think we've mentioned that. in-
it is, I mean, there's a couple of downriver communities that have that citywide. That when you sell your house, you have to have a inspection and then you have to fix everything that is
you mean,
deficient. And over the years, their housing values have significantly
oh, no, I'm
increased.
sorry.
Well, we don't have to worry about housing value.
Yeah, so
Encouraging.
I'll make the change to the
That's
NEZ
right, I
map
remember the same.
as part of the packet that goes to city council.
So we don't need to vote on that.
No, I've got the changes made on. I'll make the changes.
Well, as long as, I don't want to belabor this part of the conversation, but as long as we're talking about the guidelines here, what are the cons for an NEZ to be, for a community like Petoskey? What might be the concern city council would have about adopting an NEZ? We're all talking about additional tax revenues, not abating existing taxes, right?
It's abating new tax revenue.
New tax revenue.
That's an outcome
From the improvements.
from the improvements.
So is there a downside to an NEZ?
I think the upside is that as you improve homes in these neighborhoods, and then the neighbors eventually put their house up for sale, theoretically, the value of the neighborhood is increased because the quality of the housing is increased.
Unless you're worried about affordable housing.
So I think the downside here is, I'm not trying to be flippant, but
Yeah.
the downside, if you read through this, it's gonna be an extra little bit of work for the city assessor to have to make the changes and incorporate the certificate. So I think the con is on the administrative side of actually managing the program. I think the NEZ in conjunction with the chill grant that the city's got, with $500,000 for home improvements, I think is a real win-win for these neighborhoods, for people that really want to take advantage. But I would like, thinking about it, Commissioner Paul says, do we need to make a motion? I think it would be appropriate if the council, if the planning commission made a motion, not necessarily adopting the map, making a motion recommending to city council that they form a neighborhood enterprise zone.
Again, conceptually, it makes sense to me, but I kind of got lost with this description of the terms and conditions. Don't feel really comfortable recommending that they do it. Certainly could recommend they consider it.
You consider it. Well, they're gonna decide if they want to do it.
Right. And along with that, also recommend that if they favorably decide to do it, here's a recommended map that we would.
Go ahead and make that motion.
Probably make.
Make the motion.
I move that we recommend that the council, the planning commission recommend to the city council that they consider the formation of a neighborhood enterprise zone and specifically for the neighborhoods as defined by the map discussed here tonight.
And include our recommendation. The neighborhoods of Carlton and Myrtle.
Well, the revised map that he's gonna do, and with Carlton and so with the changes agreed tonight. Yes, that's my motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Charlie made the motion, Ted seconded, all in favor? Everyone's in favor. All right, now this is the time for public comment. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items not on the meeting agenda. Did you want to make any comments? Okay. Anybody online? I don't see anything. All right. Now to commissioner comments. Anybody have comments? We included the minutes from the sign committee meeting. So I think the plan is that if we are discussing the sign ordinance, that we will pass on those. I don't know how the commission feels. We get requests for signage, which you saw the first one was approval for a freestanding sign. I don't know if the commission would like to always know what the sign committee is doing. It has not been the practice in the 15 years I've been here that the sign committee minutes got passed on to but I think it's appropriate for the sign ordinance discussion.
I was under the impression that at our last meeting, the commission requested copies of the sign committee meeting be included in
all
all
sign
of our
committee
yes,
meetings.
for informational purposes.
All right, does everyone agree with that? Okay, well then I'll make a note of that, make sure that gets included. Any other commissioner comments?
Well, I think you should also note that we're having a sign committee meeting on Tuesday.
Okay, Yeah.
So we'll be taking further action with regard to assessing the ordinance at that time. So any comments would be welcome.
Yeah, I think the minutes were kind of interesting, to get a feel for how those discussions go and a little more, those of us who don't deal as much with science, it's helpful because they do come up. So it was interesting to read the minutes and.
Okay. All right, updates?
I just gave you I included in your packet. What the communities on the other side of the bay are doing. They met for a coffee. The 5 communities, Friendship, Township, West Traverse, Little Traverse, City, Harbor Springs, and Redmond. To talk about common planning issues. I thought it was pretty interesting that they did that. I just thought I'd share the information with you, so you can see what some of the neighboring communities are looking at.
So we haven't been invited to
Not yet.
participate. Okay.
Well, it seems to me that one of the initiatives that we talked about at a recent meeting was to participate in a similar kind of group that included Bear Creek and Resort. What I thought was interesting and absent from this commission, from this coffee group, was the county. I would have thought that they'd want to invite the planner from the county to sit in and kibitz with them.
They wanted to talk at the local level, but if I think in our work program, that's one of the goals, was that the city here would meet with Resort and with Bear Creek with counterparts. And I think what they did here is it's the chairman, I believe it was the chair and the vice chair of each of the committees got together for kind of a roundtable discussion. We could do the same and get the other, the other two, but I'll coordinate that with the chair on how you want to do that.
Maybe we'd like to send a subcommittee. All right. So, I guess,
That's all I've got.
all right, it is 7:29 and this meeting is adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry, of course.
Just wanted to remind everyone, August 13th, we've been working on CIP for the next 5 years. So we do have a special joint session with council and planning commission scheduled for the 13th at 6 p.m. Where we'll have department heads presenting their proposed CIPs for your review, which will ultimately come back to you, I believe, at the August meeting, at your August meeting, and then going forward to city council as well. So I just want to keep that on your radar, August 13th. And then while John had mentioned our meeting with MEDC.
Can you put your speak up, thank you.
John had mentioned our meeting with MEDC a few weeks ago, and so I ran downstairs because I think these are pretty interesting. These infill plans that this is in the city of Grand Rapids, but these have been, and certainly something we could strive to get to, but these have been fully vetted by the city of Grand Rapids Building Department. So as a developer, they could be handed this document, and these have already been approved by planning commission, by building department. Everything has been fully vetted and ready to go. So I thought it was interesting. There's a number of different plans in here that builders could choose from that again are ready to go from a procedure wise, from an approval standpoint. So obviously you can take it with you, read it at your leisure, and
That's what I was gonna email to you, but
Okay.
the manager's giving you a printed copy.
Upstairs.
Well, you can email it so that there's like electronics.
I'll send it.
You might have to put that in the CIP.
There you go.
Pass it around. All right, so the meeting is adjourned. Right? That went well. I was.
I used to know the people with, there's a house on, like, John with Clinton. On Williams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, go up, mid lot.
Yeah, but the
And
thing.
behind them is a contiguous lot.
Yeah.
It's a different lot than the other street, and they use it as a backyard.
Oh.
So it's a lot.
Planning commission.
Is on plan.
We can ask.
The house is on Williams, yeah.
I'm not available for the second one.
Yeah, so that is there.
I mean, the rest is interesting, but I wonder if we all need to go or just have a representative.
And it's like they have a garage to the
Unless
upper
they're
floor of the garage.
Then there's the question of, is the city gonna pay?
Right.
So that was kind of my, was.
It's a good question.